Clara Hayes wasn't supposed to vanish. Not from that house. Not from that night. Not from that bed, where her daughter lay sleeping inches away. It was an ordinary evening in November. The neighborhood was quiet, a scatter of dim porch lights glowing against the cold. Clara's small house stood at the end of Sycamore Lane, its curtains drawn, its doors locked, its family safe inside. Or so everyone believed. She had gone through the rituals every parent knows. Dinner at 6, homework finished by 7. The soft hum of the television in the background as her daughter colored at the kitchen table. A bath, a bedtime story, the warm press of a kiss against a child's forehead. By 9:30, the house was still. Her husband was working late. Her daughter was asleep. And Clara, as far as anyone would ever know, was alive and well. The last glimpse. The daughter would later tell police she woke once during the night. Just briefly. The kind of half-dreaming wakefulness that fades as soon as the eyes close again. She remembered her mother standing by the window, silhouetted by the faint streetlight glow. She thought she heard Clara whisper, "Sleep tight." But in that hazy moment, the little girl also saw something else. A shape behind her mother. Taller, broader. A shadow where no shadow should have been. She closed her eyes again. And when she woke at dawn, the bed beside her was empty. The Discovery neighbors would remember hearing the child's cries around 7 a.m., a frantic little voice calling for "Mommy!" again and again. When the police arrived, they found the front door locked from the inside. The keys were still in the lock. The windows were shut. The back door bolted. Nothing disturbed. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Clara's shoes still by the bed. Her phone on the nightstand. Her jacket on the hook. And in the bathroom, written across the fogged surface of the mirror, as though traced by a fingertip in steam, 5 words. Not your fault? The daughter swore she didn't write it. The handwriting, as much as one could tell through the smudges, looked eerily like Clara's, but Clara Hayes was gone, and she has never been seen again. Detectives often say that the first hours of a missing person case matter the most. But in the case of Clara Hayes, the very first hour already made no sense. The house on Sycamore Lane was sealed. When officers arrived, they found every window latched, every door secured. The front door was locked from the inside, the keys dangling neatly from the deadbolt. The back door was bolted tight. The sliding glass door to the yard hadn't been opened in weeks, its tracks stiff with dust. It was, by all accounts, a locked room, and yet Clara was gone. The bedroom. The detectives moved slowly through the small home. The daughter's bedroom was exactly as expected. Stuffed animals piled neatly in the corner, a blanket tangled at the foot of the bed, crayons scattered across the nightstand. In the master bedroom, Clara's side of the bed looked untouched. No signs of a struggle. Her shoes were neatly placed by the wall. Her purse sat on the dresser, wallet and ID still inside. Her phone rested on the nightstand, battery full. There was nothing to suggest she had planned to leave. Nothing to suggest she could leave. The mirror. Then came the bathroom. Steam still clung faintly to the glass, though no one had used the shower since the night before. And across the mirror, smeared in a shaky, hurried hand, were the words, "Not your fault." One detective leaned close. "It's written from the inside," he said quietly. "The strokes push outward." But no one could explain how the condensation remained after hours. It was as if the mirror itself had trapped the message, refusing to let it fade. The neighbors' police canvassed the street. One neighbor recalled seeing nothing unusual. Another claimed she thought she heard the front door close around 3 a.m., but when pressed, she admitted she might have dreamed it. Only one statement stood out. An elderly man across the lane swore he saw Clara, or someone who looked like her, standing barefoot in the yard at 3:15 a.m. She wore a pale nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. When asked if she seemed distressed, he shook his head. "No," he said. She just looked still, like she was waiting for someone. The puzzle. By the end of the day, the house yielded nothing. No broken locks, no footprints, no fingerprints that didn't belong. And yet, the reality could not be denied. A woman had vanished from a sealed home, leaving behind only a daughter's memory of a shadow, and a message no one wanted to claim. Detectives are trained to search for the tangible: fingerprints, fibers, DNA. But in the Hayes case, the most pressing piece of evidence wasn't physical. It was a message. 5 words, written across the bathroom mirror in a trembling hand. "Not your fault." The analysis. For hours, investigators studied those words. Was it Clara's handwriting? A disguised imitation? Or something more sinister? A planted message designed to redirect suspicion. Samples from birthday cards and grocery lists were compared to the letters on the glass. The slant, the loops, the uneven strokes of the T. The experts couldn't agree. Some swore it matched Clara's hand. Others insisted the pressure was too heavy, the writing too rushed. The only certainty was this: whoever wrote it wanted those words to be seen. The interpretation theories spread quickly. One detective believed Clara left the note herself, a kind of cryptic farewell. Perhaps guilt weighed on her. Perhaps she had planned to leave. But her family disagreed. Clara wasn't the kind of woman to abandon her child. And friends described her as devoted, protective to the point of obsession. If she had written those words, who then were they for? Her daughter, her husband, herself? Or had someone else written them, intending to confuse? The daughter's memory. When the daughter was asked about the night, her story remained the same. She remembered her mother whispering, "Sleep tight." She remembered the shape behind her, a shadow stretching across the wall. When shown the words on the mirror, she shook her head firmly. "Mommy didn't write that," she said. "Her writing is prettier." Then she added something chilling. "She told me it wasn't my fault, but she didn't say it with her mouth. She said it in my head." The weight. The detectives left that night with more questions than answers. The mirror, once cleaned, fogged again the next morning, and there, faintly, the words reappeared, as though the glass itself remembered them. "Not your fault." A message from Clara. A message for someone left behind, or a message no one was meant to understand. Children are often dismissed as unreliable witnesses, too young, too impressionable, too easily swayed by suggestion. But in the disappearance of Clara Hayes, her daughter was the only witness, the only pair of eyes awake when her mother vanished. And what she remembered would trouble investigators for years. The first interview. A child psychologist sat with her in a small, softly lit room. Dolls on the table, coloring books stacked nearby. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit and spoke in a halting voice. "Mommy kissed me goodnight. She tucked me in. Then she went to the window." "What did she do at the window?" the psychologist asked gently. "She was talking, but not to me." The shadow. The girl frowned, eyes fixed on her rabbit. "There was someone else, behind her." "Someone else? Did you see who it was?" She shook her head. "No face, just a big shadow." "It was taller than the window. It was wrong." The psychologist pressed carefully. "Did your mom see the shadow?" "Yes," the girl whispered. "But she didn't scream. She just said, 'It's not your fault.'" The discrepancy detectives later reviewed this testimony and compared it to the mirror message. The same words, 2 different accounts. One spoken, or thought, one written. Had Clara repeated the phrase twice? Or had the shadow spoken it, imitating her voice? The second memory. Days later, the daughter mentioned something she hadn't before. When I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps. Mommy's feet didn't make that sound. Hers were soft. These were heavy. They made the floor creak. Where were the footsteps? The psychologist asked. The girl lifted her eyes. In the hall, but the door was still closed. The doubt. Investigators were torn. Some dismissed the child's words as dream fragments, the blending of fear and imagination. Others felt a chill, because her description of heavy, unseen footsteps, of a shadow too tall for the room, echoed a theme familiar in unsolved disappearances, and the more the child spoke, the less it sounded like the memory of a little girl, and more like the testimony of the last person who ever saw Clara Hayes alive. Whenever a woman disappears, suspicion almost always turns first toward the husband. And in the case of Clara Hayes, that suspicion came swiftly. Her husband, Daniel Hayes, was a 36-year-old accountant, known to neighbors as polite but distant, a man who kept to himself. On the night of Clara's disappearance, Daniel claimed he was working late at the office, a stack of reports, a looming deadline. He didn't arrive home until after the police were already inside his house. That was his story. But stories don't always survive investigation. The first cracks. Detectives asked for proof. Daniel produced time cards and email logs, stamped late into the night. But when officers checked the office security cameras, there was a gap. From 11:30 p.m. until nearly 1 o'clock a.m., Daniel's ID badge was not recorded entering or leaving any floor. He had simply vanished. When asked where he was during that time, Daniel shrugged. Probably the break room. Or maybe I dozed off at my desk. The explanation was thin. The neighbor's words. Then came the neighbor across the street, the elderly man who claimed to see Clara outside at 3:15 a.m. When shown a photo lineup, he hesitated. I thought it was her, but now, maybe not. The figure was tall, broader than Clara. I only assumed it was her because of the nightgown. Police pressed him further. Could it have been a man? The neighbor's silence was answer enough. The marriage friends of the family painted a mixed picture. Clara was devoted to her daughter, endlessly patient, endlessly present. But her marriage, less certain. Some recalled Daniel as controlling, sharp when crossed. Others said he was simply withdrawn, too focused on work. One friend whispered to detectives that Clara had confided in her weeks before. Sometimes I feel like I'm already gone in this house. Like I don't exist anymore. The note. When asked about the words on the bathroom mirror, not your fault, Daniel insisted he had never seen the phrase before. He dismissed it as nonsense. But detectives noticed something. His reaction wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was annoyance, as though the message was an inconvenience, as though it disrupted a story he wanted to remain clean. The doubt. Still, no evidence tied him directly to Clara's disappearance. No fingerprints, no fibers, no trace of her outside the house. If Daniel Hayes was involved, he had left nothing behind, just like Clara. 2 vanishings, one overnight, the other in a span of 90 missing minutes. When police cannot find answers inside the house, they look outward, to the people who live closest, to the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. On Sycamore Lane, the neighbors' testimonies began as routine, but soon their stories began to fracture the night of Clara's disappearance into something far stranger. The first witness. Directly next door lived the Watkins family. Husband, wife, 2 children. Mrs. Watkins swore she heard nothing unusual. No doors, no shouting, Not even the dog barked, she said. We went to bed at 11 and slept through. But her husband disagreed. I woke up around 3. I thought I heard someone walking in the Hayes yard, heavy footsteps on the gravel. I looked out, but by the time I pulled the curtain back, no one was there. The second witness. Across the street was Mr. Latham, the elderly man who first told police he saw Clara. He stuck to his story, mostly. I saw someone in a white nightgown, standing by the hedge, still as a statue. When pressed, he admitted something he had left out. The longer I looked, the less it seemed like her. The hair was loose, yes, the gown, yes, but the shoulders, they were too broad. I told myself it was Clara because who else could it be? He paused, then whispered, but maybe it wasn't her at all. The third witness. 2 houses down, a teenager named Grace reported hearing a woman crying outside her window at nearly the same time. Her mother dismissed it as imagination, but Grace insisted. It wasn't just crying. She kept saying, "It's not your fault," over and over, like a chant. Police noted the phrase with unease. The same words on the mirror. The same words the daughter remembered her mother whispering. How could 3 separate accounts tie back to the same phrase? The puzzle deepens individually. The testimonies meant little. Together, they painted a fractured, unsettling picture. Clara seen outside, though her house was locked. Heavy footsteps where no one should have been. A woman's voice repeating words that no one could explain. The case was no longer just a disappearance. It was a vanishing, threaded with contradictions. Because every witness seemed to see Clara, and yet no one truly saw her at all. Every missing person carries 2 stories. The one people know, and the one they try to keep hidden. As the investigation into Clara Hayes deepened, detectives began peeling back the layers of her life. What they uncovered was not the portrait of a perfect suburban mother, but a woman carrying shadows of her own. The childhood. Clara had grown up 2 towns over, in a home remembered less for warmth and more for silence. Her father left when she was young, her mother withdrawn and brittle. Neighbors recalled a girl often seen wandering at night, sitting on the porch steps long after dark. One described her as watchful, as if she were waiting for someone to return. Her younger brother, estranged now, told detectives something chilling. She used to say she felt followed, even as a kid, like something stood just out of sight waiting for her to be alone. None of us believed her. We thought it was nerves, but the way she'd look at the corners of a room sometimes, it didn't feel like a child's imagination. The marriage. Her marriage to Daniel Hayes wasn't the escape she had hoped for. Friends said Clara often appeared distracted, even when smiling. She avoided mirrors in public bathrooms. She hated being home alone. One friend remembered a night out just weeks before she vanished. Clara had drunk more than usual, and in a moment of candor whispered, "Sometimes I think the house knows me too well, like it's watching when I sleep." The friend laughed it off at the time. Later, she didn't. The journal Clara kept a private journal, something even Daniel didn't know about. It surfaced during a search of the attic, hidden inside an old shoebox beneath insulation. Most of it was mundane, notes about grocery lists, sketches, bedtime stories written for her daughter, but scattered between the pages were entries written in a different tone, rushed, anxious, unfinished. The footsteps again. Daniel didn't hear them, but I did. Sometimes I wake up and the mirror is fogged, though the bathroom door is still open. I dreamed of being pulled outside, but the grass was wet, not the sheets. The last entry ended mid-sentence. "If anything happens to me." The page was torn clean after that. The shift detectives read the journal with unease. Was Clara documenting paranoia, or had she been leaving breadcrumbs, knowing something was closing in on her? The more they learned, the less her disappearance looked like an accident, or even a crime of opportunity. It looked like Clara Hayes had been waiting for this night, and she knew it was coming. Detectives returned to the Hayes home a week after the disappearance, combing every inch once more. They had searched before, of course, but cases like these often reward patience, the overlooked detail waiting in plain sight. And this time, they found something. The discovery. In the upstairs hallway, near the bathroom door, a technician spotted faint discoloration on the floorboards. At first glance, it seemed like a shadow, but under a forensic light, the shape sharpened. A footprint, partial, smeared at the edges, but undeniable. It was pressed into the wood with a trace of dried mud. The comparison. The print was too large to belong to Clara. Her shoes were a size 7. The cast suggested something closer to a man's size 10 or 11. Daniel Hayes, her husband, wore a size 9. Detectives compared patterns from his work shoes, his sneakers, his boots. None matched. The tread, faint but visible, looked older, worn nearly smooth, like a shoe that had seen years of use. The question was clear. How did mud from outside appear in a locked hallway, in a house no one had entered? The timeline forensics estimated the print was fresh within 12 hours of discovery, which meant it had been left the night Clara vanished. Yet it wasn't visible during the initial sweep. Had investigators missed it in their exhaustion? Or had it appeared later, pressed into the floor when no one was watching? The daughter's words. When shown a photograph of the print, Clara's daughter tilted her head. "That's it," she said softly. Detectives leaned in. "That's what?" "The footsteps. That's what I heard. Heavy, like that. They walked outside my room, but the door never opened." Her words chilled the room, because the print suggested someone had been inside. And if she was right, they had been walking just feet from where she lay asleep. The weight of evidence. The muddy print was logged, photographed, cast in plaster, but it only deepened the mystery. No forced entry, no broken locks, no sign of passage through windows or doors, and yet a stranger's footprint stood in the hallway, proof that someone, or something, had been there. Someone who didn't belong. Every investigation is shaped as much by what's missing as by what's found. For Clara Hayes, the missing pieces were starting to pile up. First, Clara herself. Second, the torn final page in her attic notebook. And then came the realization that another, more personal record had vanished with her. Her journal. The search. Clara was a writer by habit. Friends described her as someone who always carried a notebook, scribbling grocery lists, sketches, fragments of thoughts. Her daughter remembered a small leather-bound book that her mother kept near the bedside table. "She wrote in it every night," the girl said. "Sometimes she let me draw little stars in the corners." But when detectives searched the house, the journal was nowhere. Not in the bedroom. Not in the attic, not in the desk drawers or the purse on the dresser. It had been removed. The husband's denial. When asked about the missing journal, Daniel Hayes was curt. "I didn't know she had one." Detectives noted the flatness in his tone. No surprise, no curiosity, just dismissal. But Clara's sister disagreed. She told investigators Clara often mentioned the journal on phone calls. It was her way of sorting through things. She used it when she was anxious. She'd never go anywhere without it. So if Clara disappeared voluntarily, she likely took it with her. But if she was taken, then someone else did. The Lade. A week later, an officer canvassing a thrift store 2 towns over reported something odd. On a back shelf sat a small stack of used books. One, a slim leather journal, bore the initials CH, scratched faintly on the inside cover. But when the officer returned with a warrant the next day, the book was gone. No receipt, no record of sale. as if it had simply vanished between visits. The daughter again. When detectives told Clara's daughter about the missing journal, she grew quiet. Then she whispered something no one expected. "Mommy told me once, if the book ever disappears, it means she's not far. It means she's still writing." The puzzle. The missing journal became one of the most unsettling threads in the case. If Clara left on her own, where were the words she carried? If someone took her, why remove a diary no one else had read? And if the journal surfaced again, what story would it tell? For days, suspicion swirled around Daniel Hayes, the quiet husband with a 90-minute gap in his alibi. But detectives soon realized his story wasn't the only one that didn't add up, because Clara Hayes had a confidant, and that confidant's account of the night would raise just as many questions. The friend. Her name was Stephanie Miller. A neighbor a few streets over, a longtime friend, and, according to phone records, the last person Clara spoke to before she vanished. At 9:47 p.m., Clara called Stephanie. The call lasted 11 minutes. No one knew what they talked about. When questioned, Stephanie said they discussed Clara's daughter's school project. "Just small things," she shrugged. "Nothing important." But detectives weren't convinced. Clara's phone log showed a string of missed calls to Stephanie in the weeks leading up to that night, at odd hours, sometimes past midnight. Why call so often if it was only small things? The alibi Stephanie claimed she spent the night of November 12th at home, alone, reading. But a neighbor reported seeing her car pulling out of the driveway just after midnight. When pressed, Stephanie adjusted her story. "I went to the gas station. I forgot I was low. I didn't think it mattered." Detectives checked surveillance. At 12:24 a.m., her car was indeed at a station. Not in her neighborhood, but just 3 blocks from the Hayes home. The connection friends said Clara often leaned on Stephanie when her marriage felt strained. Some whispered that Clara confided secrets to her friend that she never told Daniel. One recalled Clara saying, "Stephanie's the only one who really listens. She knows more about me than anyone." If that was true, then what had Clara shared in those final 11 minutes? The discrepancy. When detectives asked Clara's daughter if she remembered Stephanie from that night, the child said something peculiar. "She came to the door once, but Mommy didn't let her in. She just talked through the glass." Stephanie denied ever visiting. The first suspect. By the end of the second week, the circle around Clara's husband widened, and Stephanie Miller became the first official suspect. No evidence tied her directly to Clara's disappearance. But her shifting alibi, her late-night calls, and the daughter's words placed her uncomfortably close. Close enough that investigators began to wonder, if Clara Hayes didn't vanish on her own, did her closest friend know why? Stephanie Miller did not look like a suspect. She looked like a school teacher, a church volunteer, a woman who brought casseroles to neighbors when they were sick. But in the Hayes case, appearances meant little. It was the fractures in her story that drew detectives back to her door. The second interview, detectives asked her to recount the night again, this time minute by minute. Stephanie repeated her tale, reading at home, driving briefly to the gas station, returning to bed before 1. But when pressed about the 11-minute call from Clara, her voice faltered. She was just tired, venting. You know how she could be. I told her to sleep. That's all. Yet phone records showed Clara's line remained open after Stephanie claimed she hung up. A silence stretching for nearly 2 minutes. Was Clara listening, or was someone else on the line? The car detectives examined Stephanie's car more closely. In the trunk, they found faint traces of mud dried into the carpet. When compared to the partial print in the Hayes hallway, the soil composition was similar. Clay-heavy, dark, flecked with gravel common only near Sycamore Lane. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing. The daughter's memory. Clara's daughter was interviewed again. When Mommy was at the window, I thought she was talking to somebody. I heard a voice. It sounded like Miss Stephanie. The psychologist leaned in. Are you sure? The girl nodded. Yes. She said, it's not your fault. Those same 5 words. The denial confronted with the child's statement, Stephanie shook her head violently. That's impossible. I wasn't there. I never said that. But her hands trembled and her eyes watered as if the denial cost her something. One detective wrote in his notes, she's either lying or she knows exactly what Clara feared. The shift. With each contradiction, suspicion against Stephanie grew heavier. If she was innocent, her alibi was cracked in too many places. If she was guilty, she had managed to erase every trace but whispers and shadows. And still, the question remained unanswered. What exactly did Clara tell her in those final 11 minutes before she disappeared? By the 3rd week, investigators faced a troubling possibility. Maybe it wasn't either Daniel Hayes or Stephanie Miller. Maybe it was both. The overlap Daniel's 90-minute gap, Stephanie's midnight drive. 2 stories that seemed separate at first, but when mapped on the timeline, their absences overlapped perfectly. Daniel couldn't be accounted for between 11:30 and 1 o'clock. Stephanie was seen leaving her driveway around 12:10. 2 disappearances in the middle of the same night. 2 alibis weakened in the same window of time. The motive whispers spread quickly. Some neighbors speculated about an affair. Others remembered odd glances exchanged between Daniel and Stephanie at barbecues, PTA meetings, church events. Nothing overt, nothing certain, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. And when detectives reviewed Clara's journal fragments, one line stood out. I think he talks to her more than he talks to me. Was it jealousy? Or was it foreshadowing? The confrontation. Detectives staged a subtle test. They interviewed Daniel and Stephanie on the same day, separately but within hours of each other, and asked the same question. Did Clara ever mention the words, "not your fault," to you? Daniel blinked. No, never. Stephanie hesitated. Once, maybe. She said it when she was upset. Why? 2 answers, one too quick, one too careful, and neither aligned. The daughter's words. When Clara's daughter was gently asked again about the voice at the window, her memory sharpened. It sounded like Mommy first, she said, but then it changed, like when the teacher's helper reads the same story but not the same way. The psychologist pressed. Who did it sound like the second time? The girl answered without hesitation. Miss Stephanie. The theory detectives began to outline a grim scenario. Daniel, distant and frustrated. Stephanie, lonely and listening. Clara, caught between suspicion and fear. If Clara had confronted them that night, if she had uncovered a secret meant to stay hidden, perhaps the words on the mirror weren't a farewell at all. Perhaps they were a message, a plea to her daughter. Not your fault. For weeks, the investigation into Clara Hayes felt like chasing smoke. A husband with missing time, a friend with shifting alibis, a house sealed tight around a disappearance. But then a camera, a single grainy camera, gave detectives something new. The footage. 2 streets over from Sycamore Lane, a small insurance office had a security camera pointed at the road. Most nights it recorded nothing but darkness, the occasional passing headlights. On November 12th, at 12:41 a.m., the lens caught a glimpse of movement. A red sedan, older model. Its headlights dim, one flickering as though the bulb was loose. It turned off the main road and onto the lane that led directly to the Hayes home. At 1:19 a.m., it reappeared, leaving. The problem. Neither Daniel Hayes nor Stephanie Miller owned a red car. Daniel drove a gray sedan. Stephanie drove a navy blue hatchback. When asked about the footage, both shook their heads. "I've never seen that car before," Daniel insisted. Stephanie echoed the same, but detectives weren't convinced. The witness. A teenager walking home late from a friend's house claimed he saw a car parked near the Hayes home that night. "It was red," he said, "kinda beat up. Someone was sitting inside, but I couldn't see their face." When pressed, he added, "I thought it was a man. He kept the engine running, but the lights were off." The connection detectives pulled traffic records and registration logs. Only one vehicle in the surrounding blocks matched: a 1999 Ford Taurus registered to Stephanie Miller's cousin. The denial, confronted with this, Stephanie's face drained of color. "I didn't borrow his car. I swear to you, I was in mine. I can prove it." But she couldn't. Her gas station footage showed only a silhouette, grainy, blurred, impossible to match to her car's exact make or model. The gap remained. The question. So who was driving the red car? Stephanie, Daniel, or someone else entirely? Someone neither of them dared mention. Because whatever the answer, the timing was precise. The red car arrived just before Clara Hayes vanished, and it left less than an hour later. Disappearance cases often turn on the smallest details. A misplaced object, a blurred shape in the background of a photo, or a phone call made at a time when no call should exist. For Clara Hayes, that detail came from her own phone records. The timeline. Clara's phone was found on her nightstand, its battery charged, screen uncracked. It should have been a dead end. But when detectives pulled her call log, one entry stood out. At 3:27 a.m., nearly 6 hours after she was last seen, Clara's phone placed a call. The recipient, Stephanie Miller. The duration, 24 seconds. The confusion. Stephanie swore she hadn't answered. "I was asleep," she said. "The phone rang once, maybe twice, then stopped. I thought it was a wrong number." But the log didn't show a missed call. It showed connected, which meant for nearly half a minute, someone on Clara's phone was on the line. The audio detectives subpoenaed the carrier for records. The call had no conversation flagged, only static. But Stephanie remembered something. "When I picked it up," she said slowly, "I thought I heard breathing, just for a second, like someone was listening, and then it went dead." The daughter again. When told about the call, Clara's daughter whispered something unsettling. "Mommy used to say phones could carry voices even when you didn't speak. She said if I ever got scared, I should stay quiet and she'd still hear me." The child tilted her head. Maybe she was calling me. But it went to the wrong person. The theory. Some investigators believed Daniel could have placed the call, staging it to frame Stephanie. Others argued the opposite, that Stephanie had already silenced Clara and the call was part of covering her tracks. But there was another possibility, one that none of them admitted out loud. That Clara herself placed that call. From somewhere no one could explain. The wait. 24 seconds. No words, just static and a faint breath. The kind of detail small enough to be dismissed, and large enough to haunt a case forever. For nearly 3 weeks, Daniel Hayes held steady, his voice calm, his statements consistent. Every question met with the same measured answers, but pressure changes people. And by the 21st day of the investigation, Daniel began to crack. The interrogation detectives brought him into the precinct, setting him across the table in a narrow room with a buzzing light above. For hours they circled the same points: the 90-minute gap, the red car, the phone call at 3:27 a.m. At first, Daniel stayed firm. But when the detective leaned across the table and asked, "What were you really doing between midnight and 1?" something broke in him. He dropped his head into his hands. The confession. "I left the office," Daniel whispered. "I drove home, but I didn't go inside." "Why not?" I sat in the car, across the street, watching the house. Detectives exchanged glances. Why were you watching? Daniel's voice cracked. Because Clara told me she wanted to leave. She said she was done. With me. With all of it. I thought if I stayed close, I could stop her. The detail. Daniel swore he saw something. At 12:30 a.m., a figure at the upstairs window, a white nightgown. But it wasn't Clara, he insisted. Too tall, shoulders too broad. I thought maybe it was a man. When asked why he hadn't reported this earlier, Daniel's face twisted. Because no one would believe me, and maybe I didn't want to believe it either. The outburst. The detectives pressed harder. Was Stephanie there? Did you help her? Did you both make Clara disappear? Daniel's composure snapped. I loved my wife, he shouted, slamming his fists against the table. Do you understand? I didn't take her. I didn't hurt her. But something else did. Something I couldn't stop. He was shaking, sweating, trembling. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. She tried to tell me. She said the house wasn't safe. That it was watching us. I thought it was just talk, but now she's gone. The doubt. Daniel's outburst left the room in silence. Was it a guilty man collapsing under the weight of his lie? Or a grieving husband breaking under something he truly couldn't explain? When the interview ended, detectives noted one thing clearly. For the first time since his wife's disappearance, Daniel Hayes no longer looked like a man hiding secrets. He looked like a man terrified of what he had seen. Children tell truths in ways adults cannot. Not through testimony, not through evidence, but through pictures. 2 days after Daniel Hayes broke an interrogation, Clara's daughter handed her grandmother a drawing that soon made its way to the detectives. The picture. It was done in crayon, on a scrap of paper torn from a coloring book. The house was there, the little 2-story home on Sycamore Lane, windows square, door crooked. Inside, she had drawn herself, small and smiling, in a blue dress. Next to her, in the upstairs window, stood her mother. Tall, thin, hair drawn in yellow lines. But behind her mother was something else. A black figure, taller than the window, its shoulders scraping the top frame, arms stretched wide, hands too long. No face, just 2 circles of white, where eyes should have been. The explanation. When asked about the drawing, the girl said softly, "That's Mommy at the window, and that's the thing that took her." Detectives leaned in carefully. What do you mean, the thing that took her? She pointed to the black figure. It told her to come. It told her to go outside. And she listened. The chill. The psychologist interviewing her asked, "Did you hear it speak?" The girl shook her head. "Not with words. It talked in my head. It told Mommy, too. That's why she said, 'It's not your fault.' She didn't want me to be scared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I was scared because it looked at me before they left." The investigators. The drawing unsettled even the most skeptical detectives. Some dismissed it as the creation of a frightened child, mixing nightmares with memory. But others couldn't ignore the details. The long arms, the tall frame, the window testimony echoed by neighbors, the same phrase repeated in 3 separate accounts. Not your fault. The evidence. The drawing was filed into evidence, not because it proved anything, but because it reflected something that no adult witness had dared to say aloud. That whatever took Clara Hayes may not have been human. Every case builds its own archive. Photos, reports, physical objects sealed in plastic. Pieces that, when assembled, should form the truth. But in the case of Clara Hayes, The archive itself began to unravel. The missing file. On the morning of December 5th, Detective Carson arrived at the precinct to review the Hayes evidence. The file was missing. Not misfiled, not misplaced. Gone. The entire folder, photographs of the muddy footprint, transcriptions of the daughter's interviews, and the original crayon drawing, had vanished from the locked cabinet. The search. Every officer on the night shift was questioned. Each swore the evidence room remained sealed. The logbook showed no entries. Security footage was reviewed. Nothing. No one entering. No one leaving. It was as if the file simply slipped away. The replacement. 2 days later, a new folder appeared. Not in the cabinet, but on Carson's desk. Inside were copies of some reports. Blurred, incomplete, with entire pages missing. The drawing was there, but the black figure had been smudged, as though erased by unseen fingers. On the back of the page, a phrase had been added in faint, jagged pencil. Not your fault. The disturbance. Carson refused to take the folder home. He left it on his desk, intending to hand it to forensics in the morning. But when he returned, the folder had shifted, the contents rearranged. The phrase on the back darker, pressed deeper into the paper, as though someone had traced over it during the night. The division. The precinct split into 2 camps. Some believed a person inside the department was tampering, hiding evidence, feeding superstition. Others whispered that maybe Clara's case wasn't just a disappearance. Maybe whatever had taken her was reaching through the investigation itself. The weight. The daughter's drawing, the footprint photographs, even Clara's torn journal page. None of them were ever recovered in their original form, and the Hayes case became something rare in police history. Not just a locked room mystery, but a locked case mystery, where the evidence was vanishing just as surely as Clara Hayes had. When evidence fails, families often turn to faith, sometimes in God, sometimes in rituals, and sometimes in people who claim to see beyond what others cannot. 3 weeks after Clara Hayes disappeared, her sister sought out a psychic. It wasn't part of the official investigation, but what the woman said would ripple back into the case file all the same. The meeting. The psychic, known locally as Madame Rowe, met Clara's sister in a small room that smelled of sage and candle wax. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. "She's not gone," Rowe said immediately. "She's in between." Clara's sister frowned. "Between where?" The psychic leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between the glass and the shadow. The mirror." Rowe asked if anything had been left behind. When Clara's sister mentioned the bathroom mirror, the psychic's expression hardened. "That's where she spoke," Rowe whispered. "Not to you, to the child. The message wasn't farewell. It was protection." "What does not your fault mean?" Rowe closed her eyes. "It means the child was seen." And the mother tried to take the blame instead. The warning. Before the session ended, Rowe gave a final warning. "Do not keep the mirror in the house. It remembers. And if you look into it too long, it will let you see what she saw." The detectives. When word of the session reached detectives, most dismissed it as grief-driven theater. But one detail stuck with them. The psychic had mentioned breathing through the glass, a phrase eerily similar to what Stephanie Miller had claimed she heard on the 3:27 a.m. call. The family. Clara's sister wanted the mirror removed, but Daniel Hayes refused. "It's just a mirror," he snapped. "I'm not living in fear of reflections." That night, the mirror cracked across its surface, though no one was in the room. The crack formed a jagged line, one that almost looked like handwriting, words no one wanted to say aloud. The Hayes home had been searched half a dozen times, every drawer opened, every floorboard tapped, every corner photographed. But when detectives returned after Clara's sister reported the psychic's warning, they noticed something new: the mirror. The fracture. The bathroom mirror, once fogged with the words "not your fault," was now cracked. A single jagged line cut diagonally across the glass, sharp as lightning. Daniel Hayes swore it had happened overnight. No one in the house heard the shatter. No object had struck it. It had simply split. The pattern detectives studied the fracture. From one angle, it looked random, but viewed from the side, the line curved into something disturbingly deliberate. Letters, not perfectly formed, but close enough. A shape like an N, another like an F. The beginning of the same phrase that had haunted the case since the first morning. Not your fault. The photograph. The mirror was photographed, bagged, and removed from the house. But even in the precinct evidence room, officers reported unease. One swore the crack looked different each time he checked it. Another said he saw condensation on the glass, though the room was dry and cold, and one officer refused to go near it at all. He claimed when he glanced into the reflection, he saw a figure standing behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, featureless. The daughter. When the mirror was removed, Clara's daughter asked where it had gone. Her grandmother said softly, "It broke, sweetheart." The girl only nodded. "That's good, because Mommy said the mirror was the door." The weight. The cracked mirror became one of the strangest pieces of evidence in the Hayes file. A reflection that seemed to hold words. A fracture that looked like a message. And a child who insisted it was never just glass. Cases like Clara Hayes's attract attention. From reporters, from neighbors, and sometimes from people who claim to know the truth. 3 weeks after the mirror was removed from the Hayes home, detectives received an envelope. No return address, no fingerprints, just a single sheet of paper folded neatly inside. The message. The letter contained 12 words, written in block capitals, uneven, as if scrawled in haste. She did not leave. She was taken. Not your fault. No signature. No explanation. Just the same phrase that had followed the case like an echo since day one. The paper forensics examined the sheet. The paper was standard printer stock. The ink, common ballpoint, nothing traceable. But the edges of the sheet were warped, as though it had been exposed to steam before being mailed, almost as if it had been pressed against glass. The theories. Some detectives believed the letter was a cruel prank, written by someone who followed the case in the news. Others whispered about the possibility of an inside leak, someone with access to evidence feeding the illusion of something greater. But one investigator noted something that chilled the room. The letter was postmarked the same day the mirror cracked. The family. When Daniel Hayes was shown the letter, he grew pale. He refused to touch it. Clara's sister wept quietly. That was her phrase. She used it when we were children, whenever I was in trouble, not your fault. She always said it. And Clara's daughter, when asked about the letter, only shook her head. That's not Mommy's writing, it's his. When detectives asked who she meant, the child whispered, "The man in the shadow." The weight. The anonymous letter was logged, sealed, and filed, but it deepened the mystery instead of solving it, because if it came from someone who knew the truth, then they were admitting Clara Hayes didn't disappear at all. She was taken. In most missing person cases, the trail grows cold within weeks. But in the disappearance of Clara Hayes, the trail did something different. It circled back. The footage. On December 12th, nearly a month after Clara vanished, detectives reviewing neighborhood security footage noticed something familiar. At 2:11 a.m., a car rolled slowly down Sycamore Lane. The same make, the same model. An older red sedan with one headlight flickering. The same car seen the night Clara disappeared. It didn't stop at the Hayes home this time, but it circled the block twice before disappearing into the dark. The witness. This time, there was a witness. A postal worker on his early shift reported seeing the car idling at the end of the street. He described a man inside, mid-30s, maybe older, heavy-set, face hidden beneath a baseball cap. When asked if he saw a passenger, the postal worker hesitated. There was someone in the back seat, he said, but they weren't moving, not even when the car drove away. The Link detectives traced every red sedan within a 20-mile radius. Only one fit, the 1999 Ford Taurus registered to Stephanie Miller's cousin. When questioned again, Stephanie denied borrowing it. "I haven't spoken to him in months," she said. But when detectives checked her phone, they found a single call to the cousin's number on the day after Clara disappeared. 17 minutes long. The fear. When Daniel Hayes was shown the footage, he collapsed into a chair. "That's the same car," he whispered. "The one I saw outside our house that night. I thought I imagined it. I thought it was stress." Then softer. "What if she's still in it?" The daughter. When detectives asked Clara's daughter if she had ever seen the red car, she nodded solemnly. "It parks by the corner sometimes," she said. "Mommy used to look at it through the window. She said if I ever saw it with both headlights working, I should hide." Both headlights. On the new footage, the broken one still flickered. The wait. The return of the red sedan suggested one of two possibilities. Either the driver wanted to be seen, circling the Hayes neighborhood again and again, or they simply couldn't stay away from the place where Clara vanished. Sycamore Lane was an ordinary street. Tidy lawns, quiet porches. But every neighborhood has one house that doesn't belong. And across from the Hayes residence stood just such a house. Shutters loose, paint flaking, mail piled up inside the box. Officially abandoned for years. But when detectives looked closer, they realized it had not been empty at all. The entry. On December 18th, a team entered the property with a warrant. Dust coated the furniture, but recent footprints tracked through the hall. A cot sat in the corner of the living room, its blanket still warm. Half-empty water bottles and food wrappers littered the floor. Someone had been living here, watching. The view. Upstairs, in the front bedroom, the curtains were pinned back with nails. From that window, the Hayes home was framed perfectly. The master bedroom, the bathroom, even the child's window, all visible from across the street. A tripod stood at the sill. No camera, just the marks of one, set there again and again. The evidence. In the corner of the room, detectives found a stack of notebooks, each page filled with frantic handwriting, dates, times, observations. Lights out, 9:47. Child restless, 2:14. She stands at the window again, waiting. The last entry chilled them most. November 12th. She is ready. The mirror. In the upstairs bathroom of the abandoned house, the mirror was smeared. Words written in soap and wiped away. Only one phrase remained legible. Not your fault. The fear. When Daniel Hayes was shown the notebooks, his hands shook. "They were watching us," he whispered. "All this time, every night." She told me, and I didn't believe her. The daughter, when told, only nodded. "I knew," she said softly. "That's where the shadow lived, across the street." The wait. The abandoned house was sealed and cleared, the notebooks logged as evidence, but detectives were left with a terrifying truth. Clara Hayes hadn't just vanished in one night. She had been studied, observed, and prepared for. The notebooks pulled from the abandoned house across the street were unlike anything detectives had ever seen. Pages and pages of obsession, a life reduced to surveillance of one family. But it wasn't the content alone that disturbed them. It was the handwriting. The comparison forensic analysts laid the notebooks side by side with the anonymous letter detectives had received weeks earlier. Both were written in block capitals, both with uneven spacing, letters pressed so hard they left grooves in the page beneath. Most chilling of all, the phrase, "not your fault," appeared in both. The N drawn with the same strange curl at the top, the T slashed long and low, almost like a cross. Statistically, the match was overwhelming. The implication. If the notebooks and the letter were written by the same hand, then the person living in the abandoned house wasn't just watching. They were communicating, inserting themselves into the investigation. And they wanted detectives to know one thing: Clara Hayes hadn't left of her own free will. The missing name. Dozens of notebooks, hundreds of entries, but never once did the writer sign their name. Instead, every journal ended with the same two initials, written large across the back cover: C.H. At first glance, they could stand for Clara Hayes, but Clara didn't write them. She couldn't have. So whose initials were they, and why stamp them onto every record of her disappearance? The daughter. When Clara's daughter was shown the initials, she spoke without hesitation. "That's him, the man in the shadow. He told me his name was the same as Mommy's." Detectives exchanged uneasy glances. Was the watcher mocking them? Or was there something deeper? A reason his identity mirrored hers? The weight. The handwriting match solidified what detectives already feared. The Hayes disappearance wasn't random. It was orchestrated, tracked, recorded in detail by someone who had turned surveillance into ritual. And now, with the notebooks in evidence, that ritual was bleeding into the case itself. The Hayes case was already a storm of contradictions, evidence tampered with, witnesses divided, a family unraveling under scrutiny. But nothing could have prepared detectives for what came next, because Clara Hayes was no longer the only one missing. The vanishing. On January 6th, just after midnight, Stephanie Miller's cousin, the man who owned the red Ford Taurus, was reported missing by his landlord. His apartment was found unlocked, his wallet and phone still on the counter, but his bed untouched. The only clue was his car, abandoned 2 blocks from the Hayes home. Driver's side door open, keys still in the ignition. Inside, the seats were damp, not with rain, with condensation, as though the car had been filled with fog. The note. In the passenger seat lay a single sheet of paper. 12 words, identical to the anonymous letter received weeks earlier. She did not leave. She was taken. Not your fault. But this time, the words were written in what appeared to be soot, smeared into the page by a bare hand. The spiral detectives questioned Stephanie, who admitted she had spoken to her cousin days earlier. "He was nervous," she said. "Kept asking about Clara. Said he felt like someone was following him." When asked who, Stephanie broke down. "He said it wasn't a person. It was something else. Something he couldn't look at straight." The pattern 2 disappearances. Both tied to the Hayes household. Both leaving behind cryptic messages repeating the same phrase. Detectives mapped the timeline and saw a terrifying symmetry. Clara vanished on November 12th. Her cousin vanished on January 6th. Both dates aligned with the lunar cycle, nights of the full moon. The daughter. When told of the new disappearance, Clara's daughter whispered, "He's not gone. He's just with her now." The grandmother asked softly, "Who, sweetheart? Your mother?" The girl shook her head. "No. The man in the shadow." The weight. The Hayes investigation was no longer just a mystery. It was a pattern, a series, and detectives feared Clara Hayes would not be the last name on that list. The Hayes case had been strange from the beginning. But now, with a second disappearance, detectives began noticing something they couldn't ignore. Both Clara and Stephanie's cousin had vanished under the same conditions. At night, without struggle. On a full moon. The discovery. It was Detective Carson who first charted the dates on his wall. November 12th, January 6th. Both fell directly on the lunar calendar's brightest nights, and when he dug deeper, Carson found more. Old police files, archived missing persons. 2 cases from the 1970s, a man and a woman, both reported missing near Ashridge, both vanishing without trace. Their dates? Also nights of the full moon. The history Ashridge, the town itself, carried whispers. Tales of the white nights, when people were said to wander into the woods and never return. Stories of figures at windows, of voices in mirrors. Most dismissed it as folklore, but the pattern suggested something else. A cycle. Every generation, every few decades, someone was taken, always under the full moon's light. The interview detectives returned to Clara's daughter, careful with their words. "Sweetheart," they asked, "do you remember the moon the night Mommy disappeared?" The girl nodded. "It was very bright. Mommy said it was the kind of moon that pulls things out of hiding." When asked what she meant, the child grew quiet, then whispered, "She said shadows don't hide from that kind of moon. They walk." The unease. Daniel Hayes was shown the lunar chart, his face drained. "She told me once," he said, "that she hated the full moon, said it made her feel like she was being watched. I laughed at her. I told her it was just a story, but she was serious." He paused. "Now I think she knew something I didn't." The weight with the lunar cycle marked, detectives faced a grim calculation. The next full moon was less than 4 weeks away, and if the pattern held true, another disappearance could already be set in motion. Patterns alone don't solve cases. They need evidence. Proof that one thread ties everything together. For Clara Hayes, that proof came not from new technology, but from something far older. A set of dusty cassette tapes, forgotten in a box at the Ashridge Precinct archives. The find Detective Carson was combing through records of the 1970s disappearances when he found them, marked only with the initials C.H., not Clara Hayes, but Calvin Hurst, the detective who had investigated 2 vanishings 50 years earlier. Inside the box, reports, photographs yellowed with age, and a dozen cassettes labeled Whisper Recordings. The recordings. When played, the tapes hissed with static. Most contained interviews with family members of the missing, but a handful held something different. Late-night audio recorded inside the victims' homes before they vanished. Scrapes at windows, a sound like slow breathing, impossibly close to the microphone. And once, faint, almost too soft to hear, a phrase whispered through the static. "Not your fault." The warning. On the final tape, Detective Hurst's own voice spoke, ragged and urgent. "They're connected. Every cycle, every full moon, they don't just vanish, they're taken. If anyone finds this, don't trust the mirrors, don't trust the glass." The recording ended with a loud crash, then silence. Hurst resigned weeks later. His notes stopped, and the vanishings were left unsolved. The parallel Carson brought the tapes to his team. The parallels to Clara's case were undeniable. The phrase, the timing, the unease with mirrors and windows, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a blueprint repeating itself across decades. The family. When Daniel Hayes heard the tapes, he wept. "She told me," he said. "Clara told me she felt something at the windows. I didn't believe her. She was right. She knew." And when Clara's daughter listened to the faint whisper on the tape, she nodded solemnly. That's the same voice, the one that talks at night. The wait. The whisper tapes didn't solve the Hayes case, but they changed it forever. Because Clara's disappearance was no longer just a tragedy in isolation, it was part of a pattern that had haunted Ashridge for half a century, and the cycle wasn't finished. Every street has its watcher, the quiet neighbor, the one who notices when the mail isn't picked up or when a car doesn't belong. On Sycamore Lane, that watcher was Arthur Bell, a widower who lived 2 doors down from the Hayes family. For weeks, he'd told detectives he hadn't seen anything unusual. But the truth was, Arthur had seen more than anyone. He had simply been too afraid to admit it. The confession. It began with a knock at the precinct door. Arthur Bell, pale and shaking, carrying a cardboard box. "I can't keep this anymore," he whispered. "Every night I hear it. Every time I close my eyes, it's there." Inside the box, dozens of photographs, all taken from Arthur's second-story window. Everyone pointed at the Hayes home. The photographs. The earliest photo was dated 6 months before Clara vanished. Clara at the kitchen sink. Clara in the garden. Clara standing in the upstairs window, looking out as though she already knew someone was watching. But the later photos were different. They showed the red sedan parked at the corner. They showed a tall, dark figure standing at Clara's window when Daniel was away. And the last photo, dated November 12th, the night Clara disappeared, showed something else entirely. A smear of movement in the glass. Not Clara, not Stephanie, not Daniel. Something broader, taller, faceless. The fear. When asked why he hadn't turned the photos in earlier, Arthur broke down. "Because it doesn't stop when you hand it over. It follows. I saw it cross the street once. I thought it was a man. But when it passed the lamppost, it stretched. Like it wasn't built right. Like it wasn't supposed to fit here." He buried his face in his hands. "I think Clara knew. I think she saw it too. That's why she left the message." The warning. Arthur swore he'd heard whispers at his window since the night Clara vanished. Always the same words pressed against the glass like a breath. "Not your fault." The wait. The photographs were added to evidence, the clearest visual link yet between Clara Hayes and the figure neighbors had only hinted at. But they also confirmed something far darker. The Hayes family hadn't been the only ones watched on Sycamore Lane. The entire street had. By now, detectives knew Clara's case wasn't new. It was part of a cycle, one that stretched back decades. But when Detective Carson pressed deeper into the archives, he found something that unsettled him more than the missing evidence or the whisper tapes, because not all of the past had been lost. Some of it had been deliberately erased. The files. In the Ashridge archives, Carson found 2 thin manila folders labeled Case number 1972-14 and Case number 1978-09. Both referred to disappearances under the full moon, both with eerie similarities to Clara's case. But when he opened them, page after page had been blacked out. Whole paragraphs struck through with thick, permanent ink. Entire witness statements, gone. Descriptions of evidence, gone. Only fragments remained. The surviving lines. What was left behind was chilling. From the 1972 case, standing at the window again. Not the wife, too tall, too still. From the 1978 case, mirror was covered. She said it was whispering to the child. Both reports ended the same way, before the text was redacted. Not your fault. The seal. At the bottom of each file was a red stamp. Withheld by order of the state, Division 9. No one in the precinct recognized the seal. Division 9 wasn't a department they knew. and no one could explain why local files would be censored by an outside authority. The implication. Carson realized the truth. The Hayes disappearance wasn't just another case. It was part of something bigger, something the state had known about for decades, something they'd buried again and again under redacted ink. The family. When Daniel Hayes was told about the reports, he slammed his fist against the table. So they knew. They knew this thing was here, and they let my wife. His voice broke. They let her go. Clara's sister demanded answers, but none came, and Clara's daughter, when told, only whispered, "Mommy said they'd try to hide it, but shadows don't stay hidden." The wait. The redacted reports didn't give detectives clarity. They gave them confirmation. This wasn't a random tragedy. It was a story being repeated. A story someone, somewhere, wanted kept quiet. The photographs Arthur Bell handed over were unnerving enough. A blurred red sedan. A tall, faceless figure outside a window. But one photograph, the last he ever took before Clara vanished, held more than anyone realized. And when detectives enhanced it, they saw something they were never meant to see. The image. The photo was simple at first glance. The Hayes upstairs window, curtains partly drawn, the faint outline of Clara in her nightgown. But in the reflection of the glass, something else was captured. Not Arthur, not the street, not anything that should have been there. The enhancement digital technicians adjusted the exposure, brightened the shadows, sharpened the blur, and there it was, a face, not human, or not fully. Two wide white eyes, circles too large for their sockets, a mouth stretched into a line, neither open nor closed. The reflection seemed to press against the glass, as if trying to step through. The reaction. When shown the image, Detective Carson pushed back from the desk.
That's not possible.
Another detective swore it was a trick of the light, but none of them could explain why Clara's outline appeared slightly ahead of the reflection, as if she was being pulled forward. The daughter. When Clara's daughter was shown the photo, she studied it quietly. Then she pointed, not at her mother, but at the pale face in the glass. "That's him," she said. "The man in the shadow." He was waiting. The wait. The photograph was sealed into evidence, labeled simply Exhibit 41. But among the detectives, it carried another name, the only one they would whisper when the precinct grew quiet at night. The shadow photograph. Patterns had emerged, dates aligned. And now, with the photograph in evidence, detectives knew one truth they couldn't deny. The Hayes case wasn't over. It was only waiting for the next full moon. The calendar detective. Carson marked the date in red ink on the precinct board, February 3rd, barely 2 weeks away. The next full moon, if the cycle was real, if Clara's disappearance and her cousins were linked to lunar nights, then Ashridge was about to face another. The preparations police increased patrols on Sycamore Lane. Neighbors were told to lock windows, keep lights on, and report anything unusual. Daniel Hayes moved his daughter to her grandmother's house, away from the glass of her bedroom window, and yet, despite the preparations, unease settled over the street like fog. Because deep down, everyone knew you couldn't lock out something that wasn't bound by doors. The warnings. Arthur Bell refused to stay in his home. He packed his belongings and left town, leaving detectives one final warning. It doesn't matter where you go. If it's chosen you, it will find you under the moon. Clara's sister begged police to reopen older redacted files, but requests were denied at the state level. Division 9 had gone silent. And Clara's daughter whispered to her grandmother at night,
"He's coming back. Mommy said he always comes back."
The night. As February 3rd approached, tension built. Streetlights flickered. Phones rang once, then went dead. Mirrors fogged with condensation, even in homes without heat. And on the night itself, the moon rose full and silver over Ashridge. At 12:14 a.m., a call came into the precinct. Another disappearance. Not Clara, not Daniel, not Stephanie, but a man walking his dog 2 blocks from Sycamore Lane. The leash was found on the sidewalk, the dog barking, frantic, and a smear of condensation on the nearby shop window. 3 words traced into the glass: "Not your fault." The wait. The cycle had begun again, and detectives realized with horror what Clara may have known all along. Her disappearance wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something Ashridge would never escape.